Okay, welcome everyone to our continuing series on Nagarjuna's letter to a friend. Let's go ahead and start with prayers, and if Jana would be so kind as to lead us in those. Let me kind of get that out of the way. All right.
Praise to Shakyamuni Buddha 3 times in English. To
To
the
the
founder,
founder, the endowed, transcendent destroyer, the
one
one
gone
gone beyond,
beyond,
the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge. To the founder, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the one gone beyond, the foe destroyer, the completely perfected, fully awakened being, perfect in knowledge and in good conduct, Sugata, knower of the world, supreme guide of human beings to be tamed, teacher of gods and human beings, to you, the completely and fully awakened one, the endowed transcendent destroyer, the glorious conqueror, the subduer from the Shakya clan, I prostrate, make offerings, and go for refuge.
Short mandala offering, once in English. This
Ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratnam Adalakam Niryatayami.
Refuge in bodhicitta, once in English, twice in Tibetan. I
Go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Sangye
Chodam Soki Choknam Va, Dam Chu Bardu Dakni Kyapsu Chi, Daki Chunyen Gi Pe Sonam Gi, Rola Penchir Sangye Drupar Sho. Sangye Chodam Soki Choknam Va, Dam Chu Bardu Dakni Kyapsu Chi, Daki Chanyen Gi Pe Sonam Gi, Rola Penchir Sangye Drupar Sho. Thank you, Jana, for leading the prayers. Let's do a short meditation before we begin. We'll spend the first few minutes just focusing on the breath to calm the mind, let go of whatever distractions we might have, and then we'll set our motivation together. And I've been asked tonight to maybe just do a little loving kindness meditation as part of setting our motivation. So we'll do that. Just add a few more minutes to our meditation, perhaps. So go ahead and begin with meditating on the breath, and then I'll come in and lead you in a short meditation. And now to set our motivation, we're going to engage in a meditation on loving kindness as well as compassion. So let's visualize all beings surrounding us in terms of the three groups that we classify beings into quite naturally based on the karma we have with them. The first group are the friends, the close ones. You can think about them to either side, immediately behind you as well, kind of there supporting you. Your mother of this life on your right, father of this life on your left. Again, and those beings who are very close to you in that space, just behind you. In the space in front of you are the beings who are challenging for you, who may have harmed you, or those that you love, or who hold views that are opposed to yours, kind of the troublemakers in our lives. And then surrounding those two groups are the third group of beings, the neutral people, the strangers, the countless other beings who we don't have a direct connection with. And we can think about that, including all the other sentient beings of the various realms in human form. This vast ocean of beings surrounding the friends and the difficult people that you visualized. Let's start with generating loving kindness for ourselves. Start cultivating thoughts towards yourself, such as, may I be happy. May I find the causes that lead to true happiness. May I be at peace. Just begin to cultivate these thoughts of loving kindness toward yourself. Whatever words feel appropriate, just say them to yourself and genuinely want yourself to have complete happiness. And as your heart fills with loving kindness for yourself, first extend it to those people who are close to you. Just think about them in general, though if you want to direct it towards specific people in that group, you're certainly welcome to. But generate the same types of thoughts. May you be happy. May you have all the causes of true peace and happiness. May you be at ease. May you find true peace. Just use whatever words work for you and fill your heart with loving kindness towards those beings who are your friends in this life. And try to open your heart to the vast number of people, beings who are strangers to you. And they haven't harmed you, but in this life they haven't helped you either. They are beings who want to be happy. So start to open your heart to them with similar thoughts. May you have happiness and all the causes of happiness. May you be at ease. May you find peace. May you know true joy and well-being. And whatever works for you in generating these thoughts, opening your heart to that ocean of beings who are strangers to you in this life. And finally, turn your attention towards those beings who are difficult for you. And we see how even just observing them, sometimes our heart closes down a little. But those beings as well want happiness. And if they've harmed you or those that you love, it's simply due to their own lack of happiness and well-being that they've committed those acts. If you want them to stop doing those things, then genuinely wish for them to be happy. If they had happiness, they wouldn't be doing those things. So try to cultivate similar thoughts towards this group of difficult people. May you too have happiness. May you come to have all the causes of true happiness. May you find peace. May you find joy. See if you can be genuine in this, but if not, just fake it till you make it. Try to cultivate those thoughts of loving kindness to include those beings who are challenging. And then to generate compassion, we'll do this for all beings at one time. Could go group by group, but for tonight, let's just observe these beings, regardless of what group they are in. They also want to be free from suffering. They want to have the kind of state of peace that comes from abandoning all suffering and all the causes of suffering. So we begin to cultivate that thought and just feel it going out further and further, embracing more and more beings. May all these beings have happiness. May they be free from suffering. May they come to know true peace. May they be free from the causes of suffering, from karma and delusions. May they fully pacify their minds and achieve their greatest potential. And just whatever thoughts work for you, generate a sincere compassion for yourself and all beings. Then we add on this sense of personal responsibility, what we call the superior intention, this altruistic thought that says, and I will do this for them. I will lead these beings to happiness. I will free them from suffering. I will help every one of them without exception to achieve their ultimate state of well-being. And how will I do this? By becoming a Buddha, by fully developing my own mind, and then being endowed with the perfect qualities of compassion, wisdom, and power to be able to benefit all beings perfectly. And this is our motivation of bodhicitta that we bring to tonight's class. Rooted in love and compassion for all beings. You can open your eyes fully when you're ready, and we'll begin. Okay, so thank you for that suggestion, Anne-Marie. Hope that was good. Let's get into our text. We are kind of working our way through this text. We're in this kind of section that has to do with, I think it's the third part of this book, that has to do with kind of the practices that are common for both householders, lay people like ourselves, as well as those who are monastics. And there was kind of three sections, I think, to this. And the third section had to do with utilizing the human form fully. We started this last week. And again, last week my computer malfunctioned, so let's hope that it stays intact for the whole teaching tonight. But we didn't have a chance to share many of the screens. But we're only a couple of verses into this. But I just wanted to go back to it and just kind of get us grounded in this. It says there are 3 points to this division. Kind of how do we utilize our human existence that we have to the greatest ability? The first is the removal of attachment for the body through contemplating its impermanence and its lack of substance. Kind of seeing that there's nothing kind of lasting and permanent about this body. And we're going to go on to talk in the second section. Let's see if I can find that. Where is that? Anyway, we'll be going on to after removal of attachment to the body. There it is, contemplation of the difficulty of attaining a life like this one, and then some particular advice to the king, who he's addressing this whole treatise to, these verses. So we looked at the first verse of these, removal of attachment for the body. It says, life being susceptible to many harms is more impermanent than a wind-blown bubble of water. We usually just call it a water bubble. Lama Tsongkhapa says the same thing in his Foundation of All Good Qualities. This life is like a water bubble, could burst at any moment. Most wondrous is the leisure of inhaling one breath, having exhaled another, and awakened from sleep. How amazing that every day we get up, having awakened from our sleep, and we're still breathing, we're still, in this world. I'm not going to go through the commentary, but just do the couple of verses that we did. The next one, 56, is getting into that reality of the impermanence of the body by talking about what happens to it. The body's end is to become dust, to dry up, to rot, or finally become filth, decomposing and what have you. Understand it as lacking essence, and by nature as having to undergo destruction, desiccation, putrefaction, or dissection. So again, these are unpleasant things to think about to some degree. Over dinner, John and I were talking about 6 Feet Under, the television show, where at the beginning of every show, someone would die, and then they would, in the funeral home that is the basis for the show, they would show them, working with these bodies and embalming them and everything. We have to kind of face that reality that this is a corpse essentially that we're walking around with. It's just a matter of time before it's laying on a slab somewhere with no life in it, and kind of appreciate the body and this life while we have it, but not have this great attachment to the body, because this is what's going to happen to all of us, right? Let's go on then to the next verse, which is where we left off. It says, the following verse is stated to illustrate that if the ultimate destruction of extremely stable things is certain, it will obviously be so for the human body. So if we look at the world around us and destruction is going on all the time, well then guess what, folks? It's going to happen to this very body. So verse 57 says, the earth, Meru, Mount Meru, this mythical mountain, the center of the universe, and the oceans, even these physical bodies, are to be consumed by 7 blazing suns, leaving not even dust. What need to speak of such a frail thing as the human body? So in traditional Buddhist cosmology, there are all these sort of periods of time that are these eons of essentially 4 periods. And everything starts with kind of a eon of arising. So there's this eon where things come into existence, then they abide in the second part, then they decline and are destroyed, and then there's what's called an empty eon where nothing's going on. And so essentially this is how Buddhism talks about it, whether this is what scientists would hold to, but even this amazing, Milky Way galaxy and all of the world systems that we can see with our eyes, this is going to go out of existence. Things do not stay in existence. The sun that's at the center of our solar system will eventually fizzle out and explode or whatever it does and goes nova or whatever these things are. This is the nature of physical things, is that they will eventually be destroyed. Whether you believe in Buddhist cosmology or not, we know that this is what happens. So Why shouldn't this happen to our bodies? Why are we holding this mistaken view, thinking that our bodies are somehow going to continue to last, even though everything around us is, kind of being destroyed and what have you? So the commentary says, when the world is destroyed by fire, even such firm and solid physical bodies as the earth, Mount Meru, together with the seven gold mountains in the inner and outer seas, will be totally destroyed. Again, these are references to traditional Buddhist cosmology. His Holiness Dalai Lama has said, well, if we find things that are contrary to Buddhist cosmology, then we have to deny that that's the way things are. Remember, the Buddha was teaching to people of the Vedic traditions who had a very strong sense of Buddhist cosmology, or their own cosmology, that Buddhism very much adopted. A scripture states, the very sun will burn all the forests and vegetation, the smaller streams will be dried up with the arising of a second sun, and a third sun will dry up Lake Anavatapta and its four great rivers. Every drop of water in the oceans will be dried up by the fourth and fifth suns. With the arising of the sixth sun, no drop of water will remain anywhere, and the great earth, along with Mount Meru, will begin to emit smoke. When the seventh sun arises, the flames of all the suns will converge into a single fire, and not even dust will remain. Again, this is in a scripture of some sort, a sutra, but however it happens, the reality is that things will be destroyed. Things do not continue to abide forever. If even physical bodies of such solidity as these are to be completely annihilated by the force of seven suns blazing as a single flame, what need is there to say so for the ever so frail human body? Due to its impermanence, there is no time at which it could not be destroyed. And so this is, again, just to get us into this thinking that we have to let go of our attachment to the body on the basis of seeing its impermanence. We got one more verse in this section that's all working with letting go of our attachment to the body. And it says the following verse is stated to illustrate that, since life is so impermanent then, and since one's body lacks any substance, one should relinquish all interest in samsara. Going to get to that place of renunciation. We're going to talk about that soon as well. It's coming up in our text where we talk more directly about how to develop renunciation. So let me move it up a little bit so we can read this next verse in the commentary. Thus, all being is impermanent, lacking any self-nature, it is without a savior, guardian, or resting place. Hence, great one, develop aversion for samsara, which, like the plantain, has no substance. So samsara, when we talk about samsara, yes, we are including this physical world that will be eventually destroyed, and everything that we know of as physical phenomena. All of this is temporary, impermanent, changing. But samsara is primarily our own cycling in this state of existence through the force of our karma and delusions. Kind of have our own personal samsara. We can include in that the worlds that we inhabit and experience. But with this, just even the knowledge that things are impermanent in this way already speaks to their unsatisfactory nature. We try to find things that we can rely upon in our world. And that's a section coming up too, is kind of all the faults of samsara when we begin to open our eyes to really see what we are engaged in. But this verse is reminding us, well, if this is the case with regard to our bodies, the worlds that we live in, everything around us is impermanent, is not going to last for even a single second because it's constantly changing. And our own bodies will have to leave behind our consciousness going on to another existence. Give up our attachment to samsara, give up our belief in it having some sort of real existence because it's unsatisfactory. And we have to develop actually an aversion for samsara, which we channel into, again, kind of this renunciation. So the commentary by Venerable Rendawa says, not only all physical things, but every one of the five closely grasping heaps. The five heaps are our five aggregates of form, and then the other four are related to the mind, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, consciousness. It's a way of kind of talking about the basis for a person. So every one of these, whether we talk about mental aggregates or heaps, or the physical heap, this form, as well, is impermanent and without any self-nature. This is its emptiness that we've talked about as well, as previously explained. They are without any savior to protect them from suffering, without any guardian to aid them, and are even without any opportunity of finding an ordinary place of rest, right? As long as we are under the control of this, we just keep going from life to life. There's no savior or guardian who's going to come in and interrupt that for us and say, okay, you're free of that now. Therefore, O great one, develop an aversion for, that is, become disgusted by this samsara, which, like the plantain tree, has no substance. They often use this example of a plantain tree or a banana tree as the idea, and I've never really picked one apart, but it said that if you kind of pick it apart, there's no real core to it. It just kind of is all these leaves that kind of make themselves into a sort of stalk on which the bananas and plantains or whatever grow. So there's no real core essence to it. And so that's how they often refer to things in regard to emptiness, is that they're like the plantain tree and that you go looking for their substantial essence and you don't find it. There's nothing there that you could point to and go, oh, there it is. So it's another one of these examples of things that are impermanent and lacking any self-nature. Impermanence does point to things lacking self-nature, but not everything in our world is impermanent. Emptiness, for example, is not impermanent. It doesn't change. It is a lasting quality of all phenomena. As long as they exist, my computer, as long as my computer is here, the emptiness of my computer is here. And it is a constant moment by moment. It doesn't change. My computer changes. It's constantly degenerating, and eventually will be garbage, and I won't be able to use it anymore. But the idea is that impermanence, if things, weren't capable of changing, then, or if things had self-nature, then they wouldn't be capable of changing. So the impermanence does point to their lack of self-nature. Again, we talked about their emptiness or lack of self-nature before. Here, the emphasis is primarily on impermanence, on the fact that all the stuff that we tend to rely upon changes moment by moment. And most things eventually go out of existence, especially this body. This body isn't going to last. There's a lot of scientists and things thinking they can overcome mortality and develop some ability for us to have our bodies forever. But Buddhism would say, well, your body's going to still keep changing. You're not going to, might be able to overcome some things. Now we're going to enter into another section. Next is advice to put this human life of opportunity and fortune to full use after having contemplated the difficulty of finding it. Okay, so contemplation of the difficulty of attaining a life of opportunity and fortune. Many of you have heard these teachings before because they're usually set out when we talk about the difficulty of finding a human rebirth in the long run. So verse 59, this wonderful turtle analogy. More difficult than a turtle, a sea turtle's, finding a single yolk in the ocean is an animal's acquiring a human life. Thus, with the power of being human, make such a life fruitful through practicing the holy Dharma. So this analogy is explained. So let's continue on with the little commentary. Suppose the entire world were a great ocean. Right now, what is it, like 2/3 of the planet is covered with ocean or something like that, and about 1/3 is land. Imagine that it's entirely an ocean, in which there lived a blind sea turtle, which rose to the surface only once every 100 years. And on the surface of that ocean were a yolk, a ring of some sort. They often call this like a golden yolk, with a single opening, driven about in every direction by the wind. And it's the whole planet that this thing is going across, and there's only one of them, right? So the turtle is coming up every 100 years, and we're talking about the chances of the turtle putting its head through that golden yolk. Difficult indeed would it be for the turtle's neck to meet with the opening of that yolk and become secured there. However, even more difficult than that is it for an animal to acquire birth as a human, since animals, due to their stupidity, their ignorance, are unable to generate powerful good karma. This is why Rinpoche would always recommend that we don't just take care of our animals by feeding them and what have you. We try to create some opportunity for seeds to be planted in their minds through reciting mantras. And there's recordings of Rinpoche that you can download MP3 files and have them playing in your house when you're there or when you're not there, for your animals to hear them, to have these imprints. But animals have no kind of volition to engage in. acts of compassion, other than maybe those that, and they don't have maybe compassion for their offspring. I remember many years ago hearing about this cat. They ended up naming it Scarlet. It lived in New York City, and its kittens were in a building that was burning. And it went in, even though its own fur and skin was singed, it went in to get every single kitten out of that burning building. So they do have kind of some compassion for their own. And certainly many animals can be taught to be more compassionate in practice by training them to be rescue dogs or what have you. But it's not a natural tendency for animals to do this. Some of them are more mild-mannered and certainly do care for each other and what have you. I'm not denying that. But to go to the extent of engaging in a lot of virtuous actions is probably not going to happen in an animal life. They might be able to create some virtue again through their behaviors that they've learned, or that might be more instinctual for them. But nonetheless, it's very, very difficult. So the idea again is that this analogy of this turtle, it's rare for an animal to be reborn as a human than for the turtle to poke its head up through this yoke. So that yoke represents a kind of a perfect human rebirth, where you have access to the Dharma and the ability to practice it and study it and everything. We want to make sure that we see how difficult it is to attain this. So there's a little sutra passage. I'm just going to go through the rest of this section without probably too much more commentary, because I think, again, most of us have heard this analogy before in the Lamrim. The point is stated in a sutra as follows. Monks, if there were a blind, long-lived turtle dwelling in the ocean the size of the entire world, who rose to the surface a single time with the passing of every 100 years, and if there were upon such a great ocean a yoke with a single opening, which, when driven by the eastern wind, moved to the west and so forth, monks, there could come a time when, as he rose to the surface, the blind turtle's neck would enter into the opening of that yoke. Yet I, monks, declare that attaining birth as a human is of much greater difficulty. I don't know if we got the blind part in the passage above. This is a blind turtle, folks. So it's even more difficult, right? Because you can't look up at the surface of the ocean and say, oh, I'm going to go up over there because the yoke's over there. It makes it sound really like chance that we even have an existence like this. But it's just to show its difficulty. And of course, once we know the causes of it, we can engage in those. And I talked about those previously, I think, with this group. I'll touch on them shortly in a moment. Therefore, with the power that a human being possesses, practice the holy Dharma and bring fruitfulness to such a birth by making this pursuit the essence of the human life. So recall again, the three main causes for attaining a rebirth like this are: one, to practice good morality, not engage in the 10 non-virtues that we discussed some time ago, uphold your vows, all of these sorts of things. Number two, practice generosity, giving, because you want to have resources in that life. You don't want to take your human good karma and be born as a human and be born in a place where you are struggling every day just to find food to eat or shelter from the elements, what have you. The third is to practice making kind of stainless prayers every day, to have prayers that are not directed towards the pleasures of existence, but are actually wanting this good rebirth in order to practice the path of liberation and enlightenment, to kind of be free from worldly concerns. So those are the three main things that we should be very attentive to. Obviously, morality being the most important, because we have to have that seed of a good rebirth to start with, but also to create the additional conditions that help us to get all the other elements of a good rebirth. So now we continue in this section. Nagarjuna has a few more verses. He says the following verse is stated to illustrate that since attaining a human life is so difficult, to waste it would be real stupidity. Now, again, don't take this too personally, but yet take it personally in terms of, are we using this life as well as what we should be? The analogy is made to a beautiful vase. He says, enjoy even more stupid than one who fills a jewel-embellished gold vessel with excrement is the person who, having been born a human, performs evil deeds. It's like you get this incredible rebirth and you don't do anything but create non-virtue with it. Well, that's comparable to taking a beautiful jewel-encrusted golden vessel, a vase of some sort, and filling it with excrement. Kind of works as an analogy to some degree. A person who filled a gold vessel embellished by many kinds of precious jewels with filth, such as urine and excrement, would, in the world, most certainly be scorned for having used it in an unsuitable manner. Like, why are you taking that incredibly valuable thing that's so precious and just muddying it, dirtying it through your own waste? Yet those who, born as humans, perform evil deeds are even more stupid. For the life of a human is very much more difficult to acquire than a gold vessel, right? I mean, just save enough money, you can buy a nice gold vessel and you can use it for whatever you want. But a human rebirth is much, much harder to get. And in that they yield dreadful consequences, evil acts are much more deserving of reproach than just excrement. Because, once we engage in negative karma, as we talked about previously, that karma will remain in our consciousness, in our continuum, and will eventually ripen into suffering for us. If it's not purified, of course, it will, have the causes and conditions coming for it to ripen not into something of equal stature because karma increases, right? So we could actually end up with unbelievable suffering from something as small as like killing an ant with an strong intention, what have you. So this is where we need to be really careful and not use this life to engage in non-virtue. Remember, this is one of the themes we've seen throughout this whole text. Nagarjuna in his kindness was telling his friend who was the king, make sure you use this life for good actions only, not to create negative karma. And if you can, use it for goals beyond that. But that's the very foundation of our path, remember, is good morality. If we don't engage in that, there's no foundation for any of the other progress we can make on the path. So let's go back to the text, and we've got the third section of this, that is the advice to the king in particular. So next, the king in particular is advised to exert himself because he has acquired an exceptional human form. And Geshe Sopa points out that even though this is kind of directed to the king, we have many of the same conditions. We're not a king in India or in any other part of the world, but we have incredible wealth and opportunity. So, verse 61, dwelling in a favorable region, relying upon holy beings, prayerful in nature, and also having performed merit previously, you possess the four great wheels. Some of you who do Lama Chopa, the Guru Puja, might recognize this idea of the four wheels, the Mahayana's four wheels that are such an ideal condition. Essentially, these come down to the four things that were mentioned. First, that we have a conducive environment for study and practice. That we're actually living in parts of the world where there isn't great strife and difficulty and suffering and things that are conditions that are opposing our practice. Kind of have a good conducive environment. The second of the Mahayana wheels is meeting holy beings. I mean, it doesn't mean necessarily meeting them face to face, but we have met with these holy beings through the force of their teachings. And talked about this before. If it wasn't for the great kindness of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Yeshe, Lama Zopa, we wouldn't be here. Really, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be sitting in this room without them having made contact with us, helped us to have an access to this path. The third is making excellent prayers, it's called. And the idea is kind of being very devout, having some spiritual aspirations. And that, again, may be something we have to check up. What are our aspirations? Are we still more worldly oriented, or are we actually having some wish to attain liberation and enlightenment? But all of us have that to some degree. We wouldn't be here continuing to do these teachings if we didn't have some confidence in that path and some devotion to it. And number four is having extensive merit, that we actually have created enough merit to be able to enjoy a life of relative leisure. Again, we're not struggling like people are in some parts of this world, just trying to feed themselves every day. I mean, look at what's going on in Gaza right now with, the conditions. And you talk about not a conducive environment and not, ideal conditions. It's kind of all coming to a head. Maybe prior to all of this, people were in a better condition, but they are definitely not experiencing that right now. We should be looking at how we possess these four great wheels, these Mahayana wheels. And this is the vehicle then that will get us to a more supreme goal, help us to actually do something quite meaningful with this life. So number one, dwelling in a region which favors the Arya paths arising, which where we've got pretty much ideal conditions, not absolutely ideal, because again, nothing's ideal in samsara, perhaps. Number two, relying upon holy beings, association with whom reduces one's faults and increases virtuous qualities. Number three, being of a prayerful nature, which includes carrying out and practice one's good attitudes. That we actually have some aspiration for the spiritual path. And number four, being mature in character through having previously performed meritorious deeds. Geshe Sopo pointed out that having created this extensive merit in the past is also very valuable because it creates the karma for us to engage in extensive merit creation in this life. So it's kind of, these things do tend to carry over from life to life. And hopefully we can keep these wheels going in a sense and have them again in our future rebirths. These four conditions, he says, are called wheels, for they are similar to the wheels of a carriage. Just as a carriage fitted with suitable wheels enables one to travel with great ease to a desired region, so does being endowed with the above qualities enable a follower of the path to reach liberation with facility, with ease. Endowed with the four great wheels, you, the king, possess all the conditions necessary for the pursuit of the path and are therefore urged to exert yourself in that endeavor. And again, we can think not just the king has these, we have these. And then do a meditation on this, really see how you have those. If you kind of recognize that you have all of these kind of qualities that are imbuing you with the ability to use this life well, then don't ignore that. Don't just take that for granted. You have to do something more. You have to use this life well. So again, that is, I think, a pretty self-explanatory passage, but we can take that to heart, as I said, with regard to ourselves, even though it's being directed to the friend, the king who was Nagarjuna's friend. So the following verse in the same section is stated to illustrate that reliance upon the wise is the primary factor in giving rise to the Arya path. So reliance upon the wise means those who, in essence, are the Sangha jewel or even the Buddha jewel for us, those beings who can play that role of helping us to know the Buddha's teachings and to practice them well. So in verse 62, it says, the Muni, meaning the Buddha, declared reliance upon a spiritual teacher to be the fulfillment of a religious life. Hence, rely upon the wise, as did the many who attained peace through the Buddha, the Jina, the conqueror. So again, this is re-emphasizing this idea of a spiritual teacher, a spiritual guide, which kind of, again, fits neatly into that category of being the Sangha jewel for us. Remember, we have the three jewels, the Buddhas, the enlightened beings who have already attained the culmination of their practice, the Dharma, the medicine that they give us in form of the teachings, and thirdly, the Sangha, the spiritual practitioners who have developed their minds beyond ours, who have attained a superior state. Ideally, that's who we want to rely upon, those who've actually had direct insight into emptiness, which we may not know by just seeing somebody. Anybody could be someone who's realized emptiness directly, right? But when you have people in your life who play that role, who are there as guides for us, as our gurus are, as our spiritual teachers are, well, then we see them in the light of being the three jewels for us, especially the Buddha and the Sangha, kind of manifesting in our lives, giving us the opportunity to learn the Dharma, to be initiated into Tantra, to do all these things that are essential for our achieving enlightenment. So this is, again, something the Buddha himself laid out, was the necessity of relying upon spiritual teachers. Again, our gurus, spiritual guides, many different terms for this, but these are the beings who play a more central role in our spiritual development. So Venerable Rendawa, commenting on this, says, in pursuing the path, one should first rely upon a spiritual teacher. This reliance was stated by the Muni to bring about the fulfillment of a religious way of life. He quotes a sutra saying, Ananda, it is thus. Spiritual teachers and virtuous companions are the fulfillment of the religious way of life. The reason for this, if you should ask, Ananda, is that every good quality that arises does so on the basis of a spiritual teacher, and it is through their arising that one achieves liberation. Remember in Lama Tsongkhapa's Foundation of All Good Qualities, he says the kind and venerable guru is the foundation of all good qualities. Reliance upon them is, I can't remember the rest of the verse, but essentially kind of saying this is the source of all of our good qualities. These beings who play that primary role in steering our mind towards virtue. So then Venerable Randawa says, therefore, one should always rely upon wise persons, as did the numerous individuals who attained peace through relying upon the Buddha during the time of the Buddha, right? They were there devoting themselves to following his path and who attained the state of arhatship, the peace from having removed all the afflictions, as well as Buddha. In this instance, a religious way of life is meant to as the path to liberation in the sense that one's conduct in this direction constitutes an endeavor to accomplish eradication, it's a weird phrase, of all the defects of existence, that is to attain nirvana. Remember, we have those two goals. We talked about, high status and definite goodness, or I think in our text it's called supreme beatitude. And within supreme beatitude, this final results that are more lasting and ultimate, or definitely lasting and ultimate, are liberation and enlightenment. So the king is being encouraged here to at least have a mind geared towards attaining nirvana. But of course, it's a Mahayana text, so we would include in that what we call our non-abiding nirvana, the nirvana of a Buddha who's not abiding in solitary peace and not abiding in samsara. So it's going to be continuing to be involved in the world while having extricated oneself from any patterns of suffering or any obscurations in the mind. So this is what the king is being encouraged to do then. Okay, you've got these four wheels, you've got this incredible condition. Aspire for definite goodness, aspire for results that are more ultimate and lasting. Yes, use your human life to at least get a good rebirth, to have that high status in your next existence and beyond, through having done your best to practice morality. But remember, we did have a whole section in this part dealing with achieving supreme beatitude and achieving these more lasting states, because that's how ideally we want to use this life. So even our practices of engaging in morality that will result in a good human rebirth are also directed towards those more ultimate results. Of course, through renunciation, bodhicitta, all of these higher minds that we need to develop. So let's take a look at where it goes from here. So he says, what qualities, which I've got to move something here on the chart in the Gompa, or else they're not going to see what I'm reading. And can't I move that up? Come on. Maybe if I move away from it, it'll disappear, kind of. This is weird. Let me try to get it there. Ask admin AI. No, I'm not going to ask admin AI. I'm not going to deal with AI tonight. Thank you very much. There it goes. Sorry about that at home. What qualities define a person as wise? The scripture Mahayana Sutralamkara says, this is the verse that we often use in the Lamrim to talk about the 10 qualities of a perfect Mahayana guru. Rely on a spiritual teacher who is one, subdued, meaning having practiced the higher training in morality. Number two, tranquil, meaning having practiced the higher training in concentration. Number three, quiet. By quiet, I mean quieting the afflictions who having the higher training of wisdom. So the first three are the three higher trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom. Number four, abundant in virtue. By that we mean kind of having greater knowledge than the student. If you're going to rely upon somebody, you want them to have greater knowledge. Just like if you were practicing a craft or something and you had developed your skill to some level, you wouldn't go to somebody who has less skill than you. You'd want somebody who has more skill than you, who can teach you more things to do, and so on. Number five, being earnest or kind of enthusiastic, having great perseverance. Number six, rich in scriptural learning. So not just knowing more than you, but knowing the scriptures well, having a good ability to utilize them in teaching and so on. Number seven, who has understood reality. That should actually say, I think, tattva, not tava. Anyway, this means to have really understood at the deepest level the wisdom of emptiness, as it's taught in our tradition, that final view of suchness or reality, emptiness. Number 8 is a skillful teacher, this should be number 7. Somehow I skipped one or added one somewhere in here. Number 7 is a skillful teacher, meaning someone who has an ability to convey the Dharma in ways that can be understood and so on. Though don't get too hung up on eloquence and what have you, because many teachers may not be the most eloquent because they might be teaching in a language that is not their own, but they have the skill behind them to be able to put together a teaching with all the elements to help you to achieve some understanding. Number 8, no, this is number 9. Sorry, there's 10 here. I don't know why I got it in my head. This is number 9, has a nature that is compassionate. We want somebody who has compassion, who has loving concern for us, right? Makes sense. And number 10, never tires. This is specifically referring to the fact that you want somebody who doesn't get discouraged because the students aren't making the progress that would ideally be made, right? Because it takes a long time. Again, Lama Yeshe used to say, we're not like mushrooms. We don't like grow up immediately because mushrooms will, in a dark, damp place, they will immediately kind of grow regardless. And we're not that way. We don't grow that quickly. We develop our qualities over time. So you want a teacher who is not just kind of enthusiastic and putting great effort into their teaching. They also have to be very patient and not get bent out of shape when students take much longer to realize things and they have to keep giving the same teaching again and again and again in order for it to sink into their minds. This is what a good Dharma teacher does, is keep saying the same things over and over again with the hope that things will eventually take root. So this states, this verse, that a wise person should be one who abides in the 3 precious trainings. That's again, morality, concentration, and wisdom. Is number 4, rich in knowledge of the scriptures of the 3 baskets. Actually, there's some missing from this. I realized when I went through it in advance of this. He should have, or they should have, realized the true nature of reality, be skilled in explaining the meaning of the scriptures as they have understood it to others. The wise person should be one who feels compassion for their pupils and does not tire of giving them teaching and instruction. Again, what's missing from this, I think, are the 4th and 5th one being kind of having greater knowledge than the disciples, and then being enthusiastic, earnest in one's teaching, and so on. So that kind of ends that section. We have now the following 2 verses are stated to illustrate that since one's life is free of the conditions detrimental to pursuing the path which leads to liberation, one should put forth great effort. So again, that because we don't have these detrimental conditions, we should put great effort into our path. This is the concluding verses of this section, I think 63 and 64, that are kind of put here together. Let me find my copy of it in front of me here before we go to that. Yeah. So to be born as one who adheres to the false view, as an animal, preta, or hell being, in a land lacking the conqueror's word, the Jinnah's word, as a barbarian in some remote country, to be born as an imbecile or an idiot. Again, by that we mean someone lacking their complete faculties. Kind of these are very derogatory terms that ended up in this translation. Sorry for them, but this was done many, many years ago. Or as a long life deity are the 8 defects of inopportunity. We often talk about the 8 freedoms where you are free from those states. Having found the leisure of being free from these, exert yourself to turn back birth, meaning at least to stop taking rebirth in the lower realms. So another topic that often comes up, not just the difficulty with the turtle and what have you, that whole topic when we talk about the human, perfect human life, is this idea of what constitutes a perfect human life. There are said to be these 8 freedoms that were just mentioned here. Freedoms from non-human states. There are 4 of those that were mentioned. Rebirth as a hell being, a hungry ghost, an animal, a long life God. And then we also have 4 conditions where we are free from inopportune situations that other humans might experience, which is not being born at a time when the Buddha's teachings exist, not being born in a central land or kind of as a barbarian, also having being free of wrong views. And the other one is to have full faculties, right? We mentioned that, not being an imbecile or an idiot. Sorry, again, those words are not the words I would choose, but So there are another way that we talk about these in terms of the 10 endowments or 10 opportunities. And that's where we look from the positive side of what you actually possess. These are the first 8 are from the side of what you are free from. Again, we're not going to go into all those tonight, but they are usually taught together with that. Nagarjuna only touches on them indirectly by talking about the 8 freedoms. And then I think our author, Venerable Randawa, does talk about them kind of indirectly. He doesn't really go into them in any depth. So there are 8 inopportune forms of birth. Three of them are to be born in the inferior states of existence as an animal, again, a hungry ghost or preta, or a hell being. Then again, the one that is also a non-human existence comes at the end, birth as a deity of long life. We'll talk about that later. So we are free from those 4 non-human states that wouldn't be ideal. 4 cases apply to a human birth, to be born in a region where the I should say word of the Jina is not present. I have some things I need to correct on this. That is a world where a Buddha has not appeared, or even if he has appeared, to then take birth as a barbarian in a remote area where his word is not heard. Because again, look at Buddhism, it doesn't exist in all parts of our world, even though it's much more widely spread than it ever was in our world. Number 6, even if born in a central land, to be born without, again, complete faculties. It's kind of unusual language. I don't see that usually in any of the long room translations for that particular freedom. Number 7 would be the last of these 4, birth as one who adheres to the false view, which discredits the law of karma and its results, nirvana, and the path leading to it. This may be something that we don't have yet. Maybe some of us are still questioning these things like karma and nirvana and what have you. Hopefully, most of us have developed some conviction in them. We don't have the wrong view that denies these, but that's something we can be, if we are free of that, we can rejoice that we have that freedom. Then it says the final inopportune form is birth as a deity of long life, such as those called the beings without conception. Taking birth in any of these 8 forms is said to be a state of inopportunity, for such a one has no occasion for pursuing liberation. Now, this idea of these long life gods, I might mention that this is a quite specific rebirth, and I think the 4th form realm, based on having developed the 4th concentration. And these beings just kind of go into this state of a sort of meditative state of being, and they don't ever come out of it. They kind of live in this very long, not, they do come out of it eventually, because everything has its karma that is eventually exhausted, but they stay in this for an unbelievably long period of time. And what would be the point of that? Again, if you want to achieve nirvana or enlightenment, you have to be out and active in the world. You can't just be abiding in this meditative state, where you have this very subtle discrimination and you're just sort of there. But we can say that any of the God realms, to some degree, those in the desire realm as well as those in the form and formless realm, can become potential traps for us, because the pleasure in these realms is so great that we become kind of intoxicated with it, and we don't see the unsatisfactory nature of samsara. This is why the human realm is said to be ideal, is because we have this kind of, for most of us in the human realm, obviously some are born with much greater suffering and maybe even greater happiness on the other side of the scale. But for most of us, we have some balance of these two. We can see that there's something that we can actually attain some taste of happiness in our lives. And we can see that we also have to experience some suffering. We're not overwhelmed by suffering like they are in the lower realms, but nor are we just totally inundated with pleasure in the God realms. There's a balance of these two that allows us to see that there's something to be done with this life, that we can actually see the unsatisfactory nature of it and kind of crave for, move for, aspire towards achieving some more lasting peace and happiness. So this is why this human life is said to be ideal, is because it lacks these 4 non-human states, and it also lacks human existences where we wouldn't have the opportunity to practice and study Dharma. Right? If you don't have complete faculties, especially lacking good mental faculties, it's hard to engage in Buddha Dharma, right? It takes a lot of might and effort and thinking and getting our heads around concepts and what have you. So there's a little kind of, again, I thought there was a reference to the 10 indirectly, but I guess I was thinking of something else. So there's a final little bit on this, O King, and this can be directed towards us because we're reading this text as if it's a letter to us. O King, you have found an exceptional human form, free of these 8 defects, and are able to pursue liberation. Therefore, exert yourself in practicing the path so that you might succeed in turning back the endless round of birth, so that you might be free from samsara. So again, encouraging you to certainly not get caught up totally just in getting a good rebirth through practicing morality. You actually have to want to be free of all of this, to have an end to your samsara. And that's where we go in the very next section. This is a whole new section. I think section A started way back at the beginning of this text that we were looking at. So we're now in section B. I can tell you what section A was. Just one second. I'll look it up in my little copy here. It all had to do with general advice concerning virtuous practices. That was the whole first section, everything we've covered up to this time, other than the first like 3 verses that were recommendation to heed, to kind of pay attention to these teachings. Now we are going into a section where we're looking at how we develop aversion for samsara. Now this is a part of our renunciation, to turn away from this pattern of existence that we've been caught up in since beginningless time. And how are we going to do this? Through contemplating the defects of samsara. This presentation that we're going to get into is primarily looking at what are called the 6 faults of samsara in many Lamrim texts. Let's go ahead and get into this section and see how far we can get, kind of hoping we can make it through most of these tonight. Again, most of you have seen this in your Lamrim studies. This division is presented through first a brief explanation and then with a final verse of summary. I'm sorry, then fuller explanations and then with a final verse of summary. So we're going to start up, with the brief. How did I do that? Press the wrong button here, sorry. We're going to start off with the brief presentation, which is just verse 65. Gentle sir, again, we can take this as just the way that Nagarjuna was addressing his friendly king, this king that he knew. Become disgusted with samsara, source of so much suffering, material privation, death, illness, aging, and the like. Here now further a few of its faults. That's where he's going to go into what are called traditionally the 6 faults of samsara. And when the Buddha first taught on the 4 Noble Truths, he essentially did lay out in the very first noble truth, the truth of dukkha, what we translate often as suffering, but is referring to this unsatisfactory existence that we've been, again, engaged in since beginningless time. He set it out in terms of 8 things initially. He said dukkha, you have the dukkha of birth, the dukkha of aging, the dukkha of illness, the dukkha of death. This is something we can see very clearly, right? That it's unsatisfactory, that we have to keep being born again, that there is, aging. Well, as soon as we are conceived, aging starts, and we eventually end up in old age if we live that long. There's illness throughout the life, and then there is death at the very end of it. I mean, what a raw deal, that we're getting from samsara just there. In addition, what happens between all of these various kind of landmarks on our journey through this life, from birth to death, is that we have to face what is unpleasant. We have to be separated from what is pleasant. We are even thwarted in achieving what we desire and aspire to. And there is essentially what is called the suffering or the dukkha of the appropriated aggregates. That as long as we are attaining through the force of our karma, another set of aggregates in each life, a new body with a mind conditioned by that body, and continuing to take rebirth again and again, the whole schmear is unsatisfactory. So that's what we're going to be going into in a different presentation, where we look at some of the elements of this as they are laid out in what are called the 6 faults. But in that very first sutra, the 4 Noble Truths Sutra, the Buddha identified 8 ways that we could look at this existence as unsatisfactory. So we're getting kind of touching on some of those. The rest of them that aren't mentioned here are called and the like. So let's go back to that little just brief presentation. It's kind of Nagarjuna sort of rubbing our nose in samsara and saying, look, what you are engaged in has unbelievable faults. So the king is addressed as gentle sir because it is the source of so much suffering. The lack of material goods, food, clothing, and so forth. This is our not getting what we want, that one of the eight. And ultimate death, that's one of the first four, right? Occasional occurrences of illness, that's one of the first four. Aging, the disappearance of youthful vigor, and such forms of misery as grief and outcries of anguish, that when we're separated from those that we love and what have you, the pleasant things in our life. One must develop aversion for samsara. If one does not turn away from this samsara, the desire for liberation will not arise. The author indicates that he will mention a few of the defects of samsara, only a partial explanation, to aid the arising of this attitude of renunciation. Therefore, one should give heed. The faults of samsara could never be stated in their entirety. Just as the qualities of a Buddha can never be stated in their entirety, the faults of samsara are vast and limitless. Yet, the hearing of even a portion of them at least should be enough to cause the mind to renounce it. This is a part of the faults. Thus, a part of the faults is next presented in 7 divisions. Again, the first 6 are the traditional presentation of the 6 faults of samsara, and then there is a sort of verse that kind of summarizes on the basis of those. So the very first of these 6 faults that are worth contemplating to develop a deeper renunciation, a turning away from samsara, is the defect of being without certainty. Now, certainty has a lot of different connotations, right? Here, the certainty is in regard to the beings in our lives. When we did the meditation just at the beginning of tonight, right? We had those visualizations of the 3 groups of beings that we classified beings into quite naturally on the basis of, again, our karma with them. There's nothing said about that, folks. It's not certain. All those beings that you have there on either side and in your friends and that in the visualization, in the next life, they could be the ones facing you as your enemies, your difficult people. They could be complete strangers. There's no certainty to any of this. Those beings we come to rely upon is like, oh, you'll be my companion life after life after life after life. Well, no, that's not how it works. Different karmas manifest and different relationships happen, and the whole thing is uncertain. But of course, uncertainty, as I said, has many different kind of connotations. I remember this is one of the first things I was thinking about when the pandemic happened, right? One of the most painful things I think in our culture, in the world at large, because most beings were dealing with the reality of COVID and the illness that was threatening and potentially death and what have you, was that this uprooted the sense of certainty in life that people had, right? Where you knew that work was going to be happening, you knew that this was going to be going on, da 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 da. We just kind of plan our lives with that kind of certainty. I mean, even remember how in like the first few weeks when you started hearing about it and you started grasping what was going on, we still had this idea of, oh, well, it'll be over soon and we'll be back to that certainty again. We'll be back to that place where we can rely upon everything. Well, there's no reliance in samsara upon these things because everything changes, especially again, the roles that beings play in our lives. So let's go back to this verse 66. One's father becomes a son, one's mother a wife. Enemies become friends. The reverse of this occurs as well. Thus, in samsara, there is no certainty whatsoever, right? We cannot count on things to be the way they are right now. So as one takes birth again and again, sometimes he who was one's father may become one's son. A former mother may become one's wife, or an enemy in one life becomes a friend in another. The reverse may occur, where one's son becomes his father and son. Thus, since in samsara there is no certainty as regards who is one's enemy and who is a friend, one should abandon the bias of attachment towards friends and dislike of enemies. Now, again, it's kind of weird that they make that conclusion, like you should abandon your attachment towards friends and your dislike of enemies. That's what we often talk about when we practice the equanimity meditation, right? Is to abandon those distortions. The main point of contemplating this first fault is to see that because there isn't that reliability, samsara is defective. It's not something we should kind of put all our money on, you know. it isn't going to work out. We keep thinking samsara will work out, and somehow we're going to get to that, happy place. That happy place doesn't exist in samsara because there's no certainty. Because the things, especially the beings who bring us some happiness in this life, as close as we might be, as much as we might love them and care for them and so on, there's no guarantee they're going to be that in our next life. That's again one of the tools we use to undermine our attachment towards them and to undermine the aversion towards those who are difficult in our life. But the main point of this meditation is to stop putting our confidence in samsara. We're betting on something that is going to disappoint us. So again, that's the main thing we're really focusing on in all of these 6 faults, is to develop this mind of renunciation that says, I've been there, I've done that, and I've had enough. Thank you very much. So number 2, the defect of never becoming satisfied. Dissatisfaction pervades our whole experience. Verse 67 says, each of us has drunk more milk than the 4 oceans, while in the succeeding samsara of the common person, much more than that is still to be drunk. So every time we've nursed from our mother, we've consumed a lot of milk. Well, we've drunk more milk in all of our lifetimes that we've had than the 4 oceans. And if we continue as a common person in samsara, we're going to drink much more milk. It's going to be even more than that until we are free, liberated from samsara. So each and every living being has in the past imbibed more milk than there is water in the 4 oceans of the 4 directions. For the births in which one has drunk milk are without beginning. Nevertheless, much more milk than before still remains to be drunk in the succeeding samsara of the common person, i.e., in the time until that person enters the Arya path and they become what we call the superior person, which is what Arya is usually translated as. Again, that's a being who has direct realization of emptiness, has begun their process of being removed from samsara. This is because there is no end to samsara for those infantile beings who have failed to give rise to virtue that coincides with liberation. We actually have to, again, move our mind in the direction with renunciation to achieving this freedom. Otherwise, we're going to continue to be bound up in it. And we're going to continue to just have to partake of all the various things that they use milk as an example here, but the idea is that we just keep trying to be satisfied, just keep trying to have things in our lives that bring us some level of satisfaction, but all of those things don't bring what we're looking for. In this section, again, was just talking about satisfying us through the mother's milk and what have you, but everything we go to is out of a sense of wanting to be satisfied. Does it in the end, does it ultimately satisfy? I always use that kind of joke, like if somebody were to come in here and like Venerable Rabina and offer you a piece of chocolate cake, because she's always talking about chocolate cake, right? And she said, here, I'd like to offer you a piece of chocolate cake. And you were able to say, no, I'm still satisfied from the first piece I had when I was 5 years old or something, right? I still have that satisfaction. Can you say that with anything that you've gone to try to be satisfied? It's impossible to be satisfied in samsara. We just keep going back to the bar, back to the bakery, back to wherever, to get another one, another one. Thank you very much. I need another one. It doesn't finally satisfy. We want ultimate satisfaction. I guess we're kind of have higher expectations than a lot of people who just are content with this being how the world is. That, oh, I know I can't eat 5 pieces of cake in a single sitting, but I'm happy to eat them over the next 5 days, Well, we might still eat our cake, but we see it for what it is. It doesn't lead to satisfaction. Now, verse 68 has 2 parts to it, and this deals with the next 2 defects or faults. And this is just about the round of samsara. That first, we have the defect of having to discard our body again and again. So the heap of bones belonging to each person would equal or even surpass that of Meru. So in the last one, we're looking at mother's milk. Here we're looking at the piles of bones that have been from the corpses that we left behind when we moved on to our next existence, right? So the size of the heap of bones from the bodies of all the previous births in samsara, taken by each living being, would equal or even surpass that of Mount Meru. Again, this mythical mountain that is, at the center of the universe in Buddhist cosmology. Further, if one does not exert oneself in the path, one shall still have to discard even more skeletons than all those of the past. So this is the fault of having to leave, our existence again and again, to die, to go on to another life. And that's the other side of it, the defect of being conceived again and again, having to be reborn again and again. So this is verse 68, the second part. The earth would not suffice if one counted one's maternal lineage with pellets of soil the size of juniper berries. So here you're kind of looking at the fact that you've had countless births. And then you go back on your maternal lineage of everyone, every birth that you've had, the mother of that birth, the mother of that person who gave birth to you, and the mother of that person who's the mother of the person who gave birth to you. You never find an end to it. If you used soil the size of juniper berries, you would not find enough of these juniper berry sized pellets in the earth. I mean, it's kind of a little mind blowing. If one tried to count the number of times that each living being had been one's mother, mother's mother, and so on, by making an earthen pellet the size of a juniper berry for each time, all the soil of the earth would be exhausted without one reaching the end. One would, in fact, not even reach the number of times that a single being had been one's mother, much less, all the various mothers that we've had and so on. Moreover, if one does not exert oneself in the path, this number will become even greater, right? We will continue to have to take another rebirth through the force of another being playing the role of our mother and so on. And that would, just go on for eternity as it has been going since beginningless time. So this is expressed in a sutra as follows. Monks, suppose that a person were to take pellets of soil, each the size of a juniper berry, from this great earth, and throw them to the side one by one, saying, "This is my mother, this is my mother's mother," and so on. The soil of this great earth, O monks, would very soon be exhausted. Yet I declare it would not be so for the lineage of a human being's mothers. So it would go, we would go beyond that. You would need more pellets of soil to count the number of these mothers in this lineage and the beings who have been your mother and so on. It's just getting at the point of how we have taken rebirth so many times that we should be just sick of it. We've been in this circle game of continuing to go from life to life, leaving behind one existence, going on to another one. It should make us dizzy and queasy and just want to get off the ride, stop being on the merry-go-round of samsara. Let me see if I can finish a little bit more before we conclude tonight. This is number 5, the defect of continually vacillating, going back and forth between eminent higher states and lowly states. It's not like, some people think with rebirth that you start off at the bottom and you kind of work your way up, like chutes and ladders or something, But it's not, it is like chutes and ladders more that you can fall from very high states, you can rise from very low states, you can go all in between. So he uses this word chakra, but this is in our translation, Indra, who is said to be one of the desire realm gods, I believe. It says, having been Indra, we use that term, worthy of the world's veneration, one falls again to the earth through the force of karma, or having been a Chakravartin monarch, one assumes again in samsara a servant status. A Chakravartin monarch, we often called a wheel-turning king. It's like a particular, very virtuous result of being able to be in charge of like a whole world system, kind of like a very beneficent ruler. It's a very ideal position to attain through karma, but you then can fall to being a servant. There's no guarantee of what you will experience, because you go back and forth between these states. We have quite a long section in this, so I'll see how far I can get. It says, since even deities venerate Indra, needless to say, he is venerated by others. Yet after being even such a figure, because it's not that there's somebody who is permanently Indra, various beings play that role based on their karma, worthy of the world's veneration, one falls once again from Indra to the earth as a common person, or even into the lower states, by the force of former karma of the type to be experienced in other lifetimes. One may even have been a wheel-wielding monarch, a wheel-turning king, endowed with the 7 precious fortunes and ruler of the 4 continents. 7 precious fortunes are often called the 7 precious objects. I think they include the precious queen, minister, general, the precious wheel, the precious jewel, the precious elephant, the precious horse. We often think of those in when we build a mandala, this mandala offering. These are kind of the ideal possessions of this wheel-turning king. Yet, even in the ever-changing circumstances of samsara, one falls back through karma's force to the status of a menial servant, or even into the lower states. So again, this is like bouncing back and forth between the most idyllic situations to like the worst possible states. And we're going to get like verses that keep repeating this. So again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time explaining them because it's just, again, Nagarjuna kind of rubbing our nose in this one to some degree. Don't think because we have it so good in this lifetime that that's going to last, folks. You could fall to a lowly state. So that great power is unreliable, he says, as has just been stated. The purpose of the following verse is to indicate the unreliability of sense pleasures, which we might have great access to in a particular life, but in our next life, we could have the complete opposite. So having long experienced the pleasure of fondling the breasts and hips of celestial maidens, one then undergoes unbearable contact with the crushing, cutting, and slashing processes in the hells. Actually, I might stop here and talk a little bit about the hell realms, because guess what, folks? We're going to get like a whole section on the hell realms. These are hard things to talk about because we don't have a direct experience of them, but we all grew up in, most of us grew up in some religious tradition where hell was referred to. These hellish existences, again, are a karmic creation, and they have their own limit in terms of they will last as long as the karma exists for us to be born there. But they are said to be states of unbelievable suffering. The worst sufferings exist in the hell realms. So what I wanted to do is just read this little passage, and then we'll conclude for tonight, and we'll start back with that verse, which kind of will get us into this section where oftentimes the comparison is being made. Okay, you're born in this idyllic, beautiful God realm where you have all these people that you can enjoy, having company with and whatever, and then you'll fall to this unbelievable state of horrific, painful suffering. And so we might have to gain some appreciation for this. This is on page 241 of the book by Geshe Sopa that I've put on our book list for this course, the main one that we're using. Many Western people don't like to hear about the hells, but we are going through Nagarjuna's text so we can skip over it. Here the point is to make, so we can't skip over it. I'm sorry. So we can't skip over it. I don't know why I read that as can. Maybe that's because my own wish that he would have said, oh, let's just skip over it. No, we can't skip over it. Here, the point is to make a comparison. One life may have tremendous pleasure. The next life may have hellish torments. If you think about how and why things change, you will really fear suffering like this. You will want to make a correction before you die. If you don't want to hear about this or think, well, I don't see the hells, so they don't exist, or if you think this just pertains to someone else, you won't take this personally. You won't consider how this could happen to you. You won't experience fear, and as a result, you will not change the type of causes you are creating. You will just continue doing what you have done before. You won't take refuge or seriously practice. Fear of samsara and faith in the 3 jewels are the causes of taking refuge, right? You do have to start with some level of fear. This is a wholesome fear, though, a fear that we should take to heart to induce us to move in a more positive direction. And the faith, again, that the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha can help us. That's what constitutes refuge. He says, and taking refuge is the starting point for all spiritual practice. Therefore, you must think about the nature of samsara, how it applies to you, and who and what can help you. So this is the idea, again, that there is a purpose to these meditations on the hell realms. It's not just trying to torment us to think about, this suffering and get kind of bothered in our minds. Bother you, but to bother you for a purpose. I always point out how even in this human life, we might go to the doctor, for example, and the doctor's got our blood work in front of him, and then that doctor says, well, I hate to tell you this, but this isn't looking so good. It's something you need to address and change. This isn't looking so great. And if you continue having these patterns, you're probably going to suffer. You're probably going to end up with, high cholesterol, potentially heart disease, and blah, 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 and whatever it is that they're seeing in your chart. So those doctors are giving you a kindness, right? They aren't trying to torture you by telling you that you could potentially suffer in the future. And this is what it might look like. I mean, you can find out, go to the internet, see what it looks like to have a heart disease and explore what that is in your future. So this is the Buddha giving us an idea of what our future could look like if we don't make a correction, if we don't do something different. And when we hear it with regard to this life, we take it pretty seriously, most of us, right? We go, okay, well, then I need to start watching what I eat. I need to exercise more, and I need to do da 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 da, because we want to avoid that future suffering. The hell realms are no different. That's a potential future suffering that we might have to experience on the basis of the actions we've done, which are subtler. We don't see that karma. We don't see the hell existences, but it's in our future. And the Buddha is a good doctor in telling us that this is potentially something we have to deal with. So, take it seriously. So we'll talk about this more because, as I said, there is this comparison thing that we're in this section in particular, where we're looking at the fact that we can fall from these amazing blissful states to these horrible hellish states of existence. And it can happen like that. It can be just one moment, and then we stop breathing in this body, our mind goes into an intermediate existence, and we end up in these realms. That's how close we are to these existences. Again, if we've created the causes for them. So stop creating the causes for them, purify the causes you've created, and then you can avoid it. Again, the Buddha is just being a good doctor, telling us how to avoid that suffering. Then there is another whole section that we're going to get to shortly, probably in the next class as well, where we start talking about the different hellish states and their specific sufferings that they undergo. And I'm not going to dwell on those, but I'm going to go through them. He said we can't skip it, okay? I know I wanted to skip it because that's how I came out as a Freudian slip, right? I wanted to skip it. I want to just pass it right by, but we have to look at this. This is part of our text, but we won't dwell on it. And maybe I'll share a little story the next time about Lama Zopa and a teaching he gave on the hell rooms. Share that with you later. Any questions or comments? Sorry, I'm right up to the wire here, a little past even.
Oh, I was thinking about while you were talking, you're talking about hell and stuff. What do you think nirvana is like? Now, you don't have any delusions, you don't have any self, so if you get, you obviously don't get sad and you don't get like super happy. What is bliss? Is it just like total ignorance?
So, yeah, I don't know if you heard Anne-Marie's question, but it's like, what is nirvana like then? We talk about hells and these states of existence, but we're aiming for the opposite, right? We're aiming for nirvana. What is it that we are aiming for? I mean, it is said to be a state of peace and bliss. I mean, we don't realize how disturbed our minds is. They say actually, when you do develop deeper concentration, we've talked about that a bit already in this course, that you already begin to taste a little bit of what it's like to no longer have these kinds of disturbances in the mind. But we haven't removed them permanently. We've only suppressed them to some degree through our concentration and meditation. So they say that it does become much more kind of even keeled, where we don't really experience kind of the way that our minds are so distracted and crazy right now. So you have that kind of pacification.
So, but if you were in nirvana and you broke your leg, what would happen? Would you like acknowledge that you broke your leg?
Well, the beings who have
Your
attained,
body's not part of it, it's just an illusion,
Well, the beings who have attained nirvana, I mean, there might be a manifestation. Like if you talk about a Buddha, for example, who has attained this higher nirvana, a Buddha will still manifest in forms. Like if many of us consider His Holiness the Dalai Lama to be a Buddha in human form. So there's changes going on in his body, and he even had some illnesses where he had to have surgery and things like this. So it's not like those things aren't going on, but for the being or the consciousness that is manifesting in that form, there's no experience of that in terms of pain or suffering or difficulty because they're well free of all of that. So the consciousness of that being too is also not even a thinking consciousness. This is what it's even harder to get our heads around. There's no kind of thoughts in a Buddha's mind because a Buddha is free of conceptuality. A Buddha becomes this just like unbelievable force of love and compassion for all beings and an ability to manifest for them. And beyond that, what the experience is like, I don't know. I mean, it sounds enticing enough for me to want to strive to achieve that. I mean, we don't, I don't think, I think we have to get away from thinking that it's going to be boring or it's going to be in some way unsatisfactory, because it's the ultimate satisfaction. It's the only satisfaction, where all the urges that we have for happiness and freedom from suffering are completely manifested. It's like, sounds a hell of a lot better than what we're involved in right now. So I can't describe it beyond the words that they say. We have to taste it for ourselves to some degree. That's even like, on the image of the wheel of life, the Buddha is pointing at the moon. The moon is nirvana, is the peace. And the Buddha can simply point to it, can give us like the guide to get there. We have to go there to experience it.
So I heard this story once about a Buddhist who was having an operation, and the doctor was opening his stomach and doing whatever they do.
Mhm.
And then he finished the operation. He says, "Oh, I forgot to give you anesthetic." And the guy says, "It's okay. I just
I'm fine. I mean, that could possibly happen with somebody who is that advanced, that developed, that there wouldn't really be the experience of that. It's like a show, it's like an act in a sense, but not without any purpose, because it's being done for the beings who are going to benefit from that being in this world. But yeah, Sarah, please.
You mentioned purifying the causes you've created, meaning the negative karma you've created, which I'm sure I have, and probably some other people have committed before they became Buddhists.
Mhm.
How do you purify those acts that you
Well,
regret?
So how do we purify things that kind of came before our awareness of things we needed to purify? And, all the acts that we did in this life, you didn't talk about prior lives, but I would say even in prior lives.
Sure.
To the degree that we can remember something from this life, we should try to bring it to mind. Like if we know that we were 5 years old, that we were killing lightning bugs by
Yeah.
pinching on their little tail when it was lit, which I
Yeah.
did as a kid, and then paste the little tail on our face or something in the night to make it glow. I mean, little kids did this sort of stuff. I was one of them. So if I know that I did those things before I met Buddhism, then I should do everything I can to purify them, to bring them to mind when I do the four opponent powers in terms of the first one, regret. I really regret that I was that stupid little kid that inflicted unbelievable punishment on these little innocent beings that were just like flying around and glowing at night, you know. Okay, so then you do the full purification. If there's things that you don't recall, though, because we all don't recall things that we did in this life, and certainly we don't recall past lives unless you've got some clairvoyance where you can remember your past lives, then you have to think about, in general, the 10 non-virtues and the ways that you've engaged in those actions, and do your best to purify them with that thought. And all the other times that through my ignorance, through my attachment, through my anger, I engaged in acts of killing, acts of stealing, acts of sexual misconduct, acts of lying, so on. We just bring them all to mind with that very strong force of like, I know I don't remember everything. I don't have perfect recollection, but no doubt I engaged in all this nonsense because I was under the control of my stupid, deluded mind, right? Talking to myself here, not to your stupid, deluded mind. So I wouldn't call your mind stupid. So the idea is that we can bring those things to mind in a more general way. But if we kind of leave them there as seeds that we're not even touching because we're not even thinking about them, well, then they may ripen very well into results of self
So we just bring them to mind
in a very general way.
in a general way, and we just keep doing this and doing this and doing
I
this.
think it's important to keep doing that because we don't know what we did in prior lives, right? I could have been a serial killer in my last life. I mean, unlikely, unlikely probably because no doubt after doing such heinous things, I would have been reborn almost immediately into some suffering existence. But maybe 5 lifetimes ago, I did those things, and maybe that hasn't fully ripened into results,
So scary.
It is a bit scary.
And as far as the four opponent powers, suppose we did something like kill lightning bugs or other beings.
Mhm.
we do this forever and ever and ever. We do the four opponent
Well-
powers just over lightning bugs.
Because the fact is when I was 5 years old, killing the lightning bug, if I didn't purify that karma, it would be increased to an unbelievable degree. Now, again, will I have to do this forever? Well, we might have some idea after some work on this when we feel like we've done enough. Even given the mom room some signs that you've done effective purification, certain dreams you might have and what have you. You can look those up, especially in the Lam Rim Chenmo. I don't have that in front of me, but the idea is that we work on it till we feel like we've done enough work.
Okay,
And I mean, like, I think I've mentioned this before, but when I was going down to the prison in Santa Rosa, I was working with one man, at least. I didn't know the crimes of everybody there because they actually tell you, don't ask people about what they're in there for because it's not such a good thing to know. You might end up coming away with, a distaste for who you've been sitting with for those hours that you're there. So the idea is I knew that this guy had taken the life of somebody because he actually was somebody who came to one of my teachings in Albuquerque I did many years ago while he was being prosecuted for that crime, and so anyway, I made a reconnection with him in the prison. And so I knew that he had taken the life of another human being. That's a pretty serious thing, right? So I encouraged him to purify quite frequently on that. Don't take for granted that 1 or 2 times of purifying is enough, because that's a pretty serious act, right? Killing a lightning bug, yeah, they're also precious creatures that want their lives, but there's a big difference between killing a human being and killing a lightning bug.
I saw, or I read an interview with a sniper,
Mhm.
or I saw it on YouTube maybe. And, this guy goes around and he asks people, well, what is the hardest thing that you have had to overcome? And this ex-military man said, well, I was a sniper and it's killing someone.
Mhm.
So is that, if you are in the military and you have orders to fight and kill, is that the same heavy karma?
The karma would always vary depending upon different factors, but if you are being ordered to kill and you go along with it, then you are creating that karma, as is the person who's ordering you to do that. And it's as if they're the ones pulling the trigger and you are also doing the same. So we would definitely include it nowadays where they have drones and things, right? Where you could be killing people from sitting in somewhere in Texas
Yeah.
and they're in, the Middle East or somewhere and you're, doing all this. You will still accumulate that karma, whether you're there physically doing this or you're the controls or
Those
whatever.
people suffer a lot to get those drones. They get PTSD from that.
Exactly. I mean, even though they're not in the battlefield right there, with the person confronting them, they can get, kind of this experience of feeling bad about the killings that they've done. Feeling that regret is the first step of purification. Otherwise, they don't have any reason to purify, right? If they don't regret what they did, they'd be like, oh, well, that was nothing. I was happy to do that. Don't even think about it. So having that regret is a wonderful sign, and it means that they need to continue to, as much as possible, try to remove that. And again, I don't think Buddhism has a monopoly on purification. I mean, I grew up Catholic where they had confession, right? I went to that when I was quite young and I had to confess how I talked back to my mother or stole a piece of gum or whatever the case might be. Minor things, but again, those are also bad karma. That's harsh speech and stealing, essentially. Though they were pretty insignificant at the time, they seemed insignificant. So I think that any methodology that helps us to take ownership of what we've done, have some feeling of remorse for it, not guilt, not, beating ourselves up, but take ownership of it and say, okay, then I'm going to purify it. I'm going to remove it. I don't want to experience the effects of it. Of course, it does, in Buddhist framework, it does rely upon us having some conviction in karma so that we know why we're purifying is because we know we're going to experience the consequences of that down the road. But for many people, just experiencing the consequences of the PTSD and of the living with oneself after one has done these horrific acts is enough to make them want to do something to address it. Many of them often engage in positive actions to kind of create a karma. And they're not doing it necessarily to create a karma, but it does create an opposing karma by them maybe becoming very skilled at helping others with PTSD. or doing what they can to help the people in the countries that they left behind that were relatives of that person they killed, or whatever the case might be, right? So I think people know that this is a positive thing to do. It's just that in Buddhism, it has a bigger scope because it's our countless lifetimes and going on well into the future beyond this life. It's not just ramifications in this life.
Just out of curiosity, as a Catholic, is that all you had to do was go to confession and that was over?
And be absolved by the priest, you know, the priest.
You had to
Oh,
say,
and-
Hail Mary.
Oh, yes, of course, yeah, your penance. Can't forget the penance. But that's kind of similar. I mean, I don't want to go into this too much because we're running over time. We're now like 15 minutes over time.
Okay.
But maybe I'll talk about it in a future one. But there's a lot of similarities between confession as a young Christian or Catholic and purification in the four opponent powers. I got something in my eye here, eyelid or something. So eyelash, sorry, not an eyelid. That would be really weird to have an eyelid in my eyelid. Let's do our prayers. Sorry, if you have questions at home, by the way, those of you who are online, please jot them down and bring them to the next class or send them to me directly, and I will be happy to address them either to you or in the beginning of the next class. So again, we'll get Jana to, I think that's probably out of the way. Where is it? There it is. Hold it up there. Okay.
I'll read the list.
Oh, I'm sorry, the dedication list. Sorry.
We dedicate the merit from this teaching to all beings everywhere on every prayer list. Specifically for obstacles, we dedicate for Stella, Bill, Patty, Alyssa, Laura, Tag A, Maggie A, Robin, Les, Lucille J, Tate the cat, Brandy, and Jane. For those experiencing illness, we dedicate for Stella, John, Jana, Bill, Patty, Dawn, Mary Jo, Thelma, Ben Anderson, Barnett, Raven Chacon, Rosemary P, Bill C, Robin C, Jane, Janice Baldo, Persine G, Susan L, Jim, and Joni the sheep. And for those who are dying or who have died in the last 49 days, Ian Hodner, Mummy Max, Alice Frank, Virginia Ellen, Winslow A, the spider, the baby, dog, brown dog, Audrey K, Norm, Ryan Price, the World Kitchen Volunteers, Philip Gonzalez, OJ Simpson, Baby Blue, the chicken, and Felix the cat.
And we have adding Jack for obstacles from Tegan. I don't know if that was on your list.
Jack.
And then I think we had Joni the sheep from Amata.
Yes, we have Joni the sheep.
Okay.
I'd like to add for Matt for obstacles.
Matt,
Okay.
got it?
Let's go ahead and do the prayers. You get those on the screen again here.
Due to the merits of these virtuous actions,
May I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state.
may the supreme jewel
Bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more.
For His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the wish granting, wish fulfilling jewel,
Source of every single benefit and happiness in this world,
to the
incomparable and kind
Tenzin
Tenzin Gyatso, I beseech, may all your holy wishes be spontaneously fulfilled.
and for the swift return of Lama Zopa Rinpoche,
Fearless teacher and assembly of the children of the victorious ones, Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas, victorious Losang, father and sons, along with the lineage masters, all the objects of refuge of infinite lands, please bestow the virtue and goodness of accomplishing this prayer here and now. Oops, sorry, this is in the way again. There it goes. Holding and spreading the Muni's precious and complete teachings through explanation and practice, you wore the armor of patience that is never discouraged. Incomparable venerable Guru, to you I make request. while striving single-pointedly for the sake of the victorious one's teachings, the sole gateway through which all benefit and happiness emerge, and from other living beings, you suddenly departed to peace. What a great loss! Nevertheless, through the undeceiving truth of the blessings of the ocean of the three jewels, and the great waves of bodhicitta of the children of the victorious ones, may the smile of a reincarnation swiftly beam in glory for fortunate disciples. And then for us.
And for Osokita Lameshi's reincarnation,
Venerable One, to you whose kindness exceeds that of all the conquerors, for those wanderers in far-off places, especially the West, mindful of your loving concern for us, in intentionally descending again into a family of a far distant land, we make this request. O Lama, please live long. Okay, so thank you all for hanging in there a little bit longer tonight. I appreciate it. I am going to try to keep things going so that we can make sure we get through the text, but I'm pretty confident we will in the remaining sessions. So I will be back here in person next Thursday, and then the following Thursday I will be on retreat. So know that there won't be any class from me that night, but there is a class from Venerable Rabina, and there'll be news coming out about that. Then I will return to an online teaching only on the 16th, I believe it is, and then 2 more teachings in person on the 23rd and the 30th. So with those 4 remaining classes, hopefully I'll be able to plow through. But thank you all for hanging in there. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay, everyone. Wonderful. You're very
Donna. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you. All right. Be well now.